I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, all you wonderful Austroflamm and Rika owners out there. How you doing? It is that time of year, ladies and gentlemen, to where it is nipples outside. You know what I'm saying? It is cold. Today we are talking about a client whose stove would run erratic, just out of nowhere. The stove will be just sitting there running and everything seems to be just Jim Dandy. And all of a sudden the stove would turn up, turn down, shut off, turn itself back on, and then it just wouldn't start. A faulty Austroflamm user board. Actually, I had him send me a video so I could see what was going on, which just brought me right up to speed right quick. So there's a note for you. If you have the ability to send videos to me, please do so. As soon as you make contact with me, it'll help me help you very, very quick. Okay, so in this situation here, what I did is I had him run the test of turning the potentiometer up and down while he was operating the stove. I had him tell me if the stove would turn on and off by the rocker switch here, and then I had him turn the board around and I had him check the micro wires back here at the wire connector and see if there was any loose wires, if the connector was loose, or maybe one of the micro wires was broke. And what we found in this situation was that the connector where the wiring harness connects into the user board was failing. And I had him wiggle the wires, and all of a sudden the light would turn off. Okay, before he started wiggling the wires, the light was turning on when the power was being sent to the auger motor, which was exactly what it's designed to do. But then when he started wiggling the wires, all of a sudden the light went out, the auger turned up on high and just ran and dumped pellets like a locomotive running down a mountainside, full steam ahead. And that right there is a very, very hazardous situation. When the user board loses connection to the motherboard through the wiring harness, as though that there is no user control hooked up to the stove and it's just running without a user control board, the auger motor turns up on high and just runs as fast as it possibly can. Okay? In that situation, what'll happen is the stove will start blazing a flame that engulfs the entire firebox. It shoots so much heat up over the firewall, through the heat tubes, into the horizontal chamber, and it heats the body up where the high limit switch, as you can see right here, ends up reaching 250 degrees. And what happens is it then shuts the stove down. It'll kill itself in order to preserve itself. Because if you get that stove over 250 degrees, every electronic component on the back of this stove is in jeopardy of a meltdown. Okay, electronics do not like high temperatures, and it can be very costly when this happens. If a stove ever starts running on high and the light is not flashing, and it's like you come over to it and you cannot adjust the potentiometer to turn it down. And this particular situation, he had been having issues with the rocker switch to where he started unplugging the stove from the wall. Bad idea. You never want to unplug the stove at the wall because you'll have a tendency to damage electronics by a potential surge running through the stove. And understand how expensive, and a lot of you know, motherboards are very, very expensive. And then one problem creates another problem. But this gentleman, again, this was his only heat source, so he had to do what he had to do in order to keep mama happy and warm. You know what I'm saying? Now, here is a problem that a client had recently, and that is that when a stove overheats and trips a high limit sensor, that sensor, when it does reach 250 degrees or higher, that high limit switch can become faulty. It'll get damaged to where the internal switch will stop working. This particular customer, the circuit inside the high limit switch froze open. So after the high limit tripped, the customer checked the fuse because there was no power. He couldn't turn it on at that point, and he couldn't get the stove to operate at all. That right there is very common, that a high limit switch, when it does activate, they can potentially damage themselves and you'll have to replace it. Not all the time, but at times it occurs. If you find that your connector back here has an issue and it fluctuates by wiggling it, you have to make sure that the problem isn't in the micro wires in the male connector that plugs into the female part of the board. These micro wires, again, are 30 plus years old. They become very brittle and they will snap off, and people have a hard time locating that problem. Due to the wiring harness becoming brittle and wiggling, if you haven't seen our wiring harness video, Ghost in the Machine, watch it so that you can see that one of the hardest things to diagnose in troubleshooting a stove is a broken wire at the motherboard where all the wires come together and a wire breaks underneath the heat shrink tubing. So I will have customers that'll tell me, look, I dropped the safety cover down, looked at it, I investigated, and I didn't see any problems with the wires. Then in the video, I literally had a couple of customers to where I had to have their wiring harness in my hand so that I could find the problem after we determined that, you know, the components were good, and it came down to it had to be the wiring harness. So watch that video and you'll get a little more understanding of what I'm talking about. Don't continue to force the stove to operate. And again, most importantly, don't unplug the stove at the wall and plug it back in, because more than likely you're going to end up creating more damage on the stove. And another thing is, we did have a customer that had a wiring problem, and he got on our e-commerce site and he tried to diagnose the stove problem himself. He bought several components, he put them in his stove, and the wiring shorting out blew one of the components, which can't do anything about it. You know, you buy a component, and if you don't find out, let's just say that if you try to self-diagnose the stove issue and you put a new motherboard on it, let's say, and there is a short in the wiring harness, as soon as you turn that thing on, it could wipe out that brand new motherboard. Very costly and very frustrating. Please hit the like and subscribe button, because what it does is every time you hit like and subscribe, it helps the YouTube channel algorithms to where anytime somebody puts in Austroflamm, Rika, or anything related in that manner, then it pops our channel up, and we can help so many of you out there that have never heard about us. Okay? Peace.